So, guys, the fourth major principle of language testing is the authenticity. A concept which is a little slippery actually to define, especially within the art and science of evaluating and designing the test. So, the experts say Bachman and Palmer in 1996 said that or defined the authenticity as the degree of correspondence of the characteristic of a given language task to the features of the target language task. And then they also suggest an agenda for identifying those target language tasks and for transforming them into a valid test item. So essentially, when we make a claim for the authenticity, it is the authenticity in a test task. We can say that this task is likely to be enacted in the real world. So many test item types fail into simulate real-world tasks. Many types fail to simulate real-world tasks. They may be contrived or artificial in their attempt to target a grammatical form or a lexical item. The sequencing of items that bear no relationship to one another lacks authenticity. So one does not have to look very long to find reading comprehension passages in proficiency tests that do not reflect a real-world passage. So actually, authenticity may be presented in the following ways. The language in the task is natural as possible. The items are contextualized rather than isolated. The topics are meaningful, relevant, interesting for the learner. Some thematic organization to items is provided, such as through a storyline or episode, and also the task represent or closely approximate real-world task. So, a phases of consequential validity as the last one, as the last principle uh, we need to discuss is about the effect of testing on teaching and learning, otherwise known among language testing specialists as the washback. So washback is actually understood as the effect of testing on teaching and learning. So in large-scale assessment, washback generally refers to the effects the tests have on instruction in terms of how students prepare for the test. Um, Another form of washback that occurs more in classroom assessment is in the information that washes back to students in the form of useful diagnosis of strengths and weaknesses. Washback also includes the effects of an assessment on teaching and learning prior to the assessment itself, that is on preparation for the assessment. In informal performance assessment is by nature then more likely to have built on washback effects because the teacher is usually providing interactive feedback. The formal tests can also have positive washback, but they sometimes provide no washback if the students only receive a simple letter grade or a single overall numerical score. That's why the challenge to teachers is then to create classroom tasks that serve as learning devices through which washback is achieved. Students in correct responses can become windows of insight into for their work. The correct responses, as for example, need to be praised, especially when they represent accomplishment in a student's interlanguage. Teacher can then suggest strategies for success as part of their coaching role. Therefore, washback enhance a number of basic principles of language acquisition, such as intrinsic motivation, autonomy, self-confidence, language ego, interlanguage, and strategic investment, among other. So one way to enhance uh, washback is to comment generously, yeah, is to comment generously and specifically on test performance. Um, Another viewpoint actually on washback is achieved by a quick consideration of differences between summative and formative tests. Formative tests, by definition, provide washback in the form of information to the learner on progress toward goals, but teachers sometimes might be tempted to feel that summative tests, which provide assessment at the end of the course of or program, do not need to offer much in the way of washback. Such an attitude is unfortunate because the end of every language course or program is always the beginning of further pursuits, more learning, more goals, and more challenges to face. Finally, then washback also implies that students have ready access to ask you to discuss the feedback and evaluation you have given, while you almost certainly have known teachers with whom you wouldn't dare argue about a grade. An interactive, collaborative classroom nevertheless can promote an atmosphere of dialogue between students and teachers regarding evaluative judgment.